Hi, everybody. Everyone's slowly filtering in. If you somehow found this via the Substack algorithm and you don't know what's going on, I am Tracy Clark-Flory. I co-host a podcast, Dire Straits, with Amanda Monti. It is a feminist critique of heterosexual love, sex, politics, and culture. Our most recent episode was about WWE and UFC masculinity. And we looked at this very particular brand, how this very particular brand of masculinity sort of traveled from the WWE wrestling ring and the UFC octagon into the White House. Quite literally, there will be a UFC fight on the White House lawn next year. But as soon as we decided that we were going to do an episode on UFC and WWE, we knew there was one person that we definitely needed to do a Substack Live with, and that is Frankie de la Cretaz, who is a fantastic journalist who writes about sports and culture and gender and queerness. They're also the author of the book Hail Mary, The Rise and Fall of the National Women's Football League. And Frankie also writes Out of Your League, which is a newsletter that you should definitely go subscribe to. Can you tell everybody how to find you best?
Yeah, you can find my newsletter at thefrankiedlc.news. And I am also just the Frankie DLC on all platforms. And so anywhere you find me, you can find links to my work.
Yes, definitely go do that. So, my first question for you is, have you ever watched WWE or UFC for fun? Like, not for work?
No, and my my introduction to all of this was kind of on my periphery just because I'm like as a sports writer, I'm all over sports social media. And so when Trump started coming into the political sphere, I started to see, crossover. And so it was kind of like loosely on my radar. And I was invited to write about it for NBC News. And I was like, okay, let me like look into this more. And that was really how I kind of entered it. And I have hosted book clubs with people who write about this and done interviews with other journalists who specialize in it. And that is like where my understanding has come from. But actually, I have watched wrestling for fun, but not WWE.
Right. Wait, so tell me about what kind of wrestling you have watched and actually enjoyed, it sounds like
Yeah.
maybe? Okay.
And I think we can probably talk a little bit more about this as we go because I
Yeah.
think WWE is has a very specific audience that has been courted, this, very like aggrieved white male audience. But wrestling is like incredibly diverse.
Mhm.
There's traditions of like, black wrestling in the American South and, lucha libre wrestling in, Mexican culture. And there's queer wrestling, which is where I entered. I profiled a queer league in Boston that's local to me a few years ago, and I was like, "This is dope." Actually, when the storylines were like, um, the wrestlers were unionizing as work trying to become worker owned and buy it back from like the corporate like overlord, and I was like, "All right,
Oh
I
my
can get down
God.
with this."
So that's actually fun. Yeah, I could totally
Yeah.
see enjoying that. Oh man, that's so interesting too to think about like mapping how like the storylines develop and and like what the sort of like the characters are. I'm curious. Like, did you notice anything interesting about because I know with like WWE, there's like the baby face who is like the one that everyone's supposed to be rooting for, and then there's the heel, like the bad guy. Were there similar dynamics or was there something more complex going on?
There were similar dynamics, but I think they were both like more complicated and they took like the systems of societal oppression into account, right? The heel was the like corporate billionaire who purchased the league, right? The